Hey mountain bike fans, Coach Brian Russell from the Arundel BUUR'S here with you. Welcome to our 8th and final video in our series on foundational mountain bike skills. This week I'm going to cover climbing with everyone, so after a quick safety check we'll get right to it. We'll see you in a minute. Hey folks, before we get into the training, we're going to start each video with a safety check. We want to make sure everyone is dressed appropriately for biking as well as the weather. Everyone has a helmet on and you've got enough water on hand for the remainder of the activity. We also want to give that bike a pretty good function check. In this case, the A, B, C, Ds. A equals air. Do I have enough air in each tire? I want to check that out. B stands for brakes. If I apply both brakes, are both of those functional and my bike's not moving anywhere? C is equal to chain, cassette, and cranks. Is everything in working condition on the bike? And then finally, D for derailleur. I want to click that derailleur a couple times and make sure everything is working properly. And then last thing, I've mentioned this before, just whatever area you're doing these skills in, really you don't need a lot of area somewhere in your backyard, but if you're at a local park, make sure that activity is good per local rules and regulations. We don't want anyone getting in trouble while they're doing this. Just make sure you're aware of your surroundings and are in a good area to do these skills. As the name implies, climbing, we're going to use that when there is an incline on the trail. For this skill, we're going to have a progression of skills we've gone through previously. We're certainly going to start in the ready position for this skill, and then we're going to take last week's lesson, bike and body separation forward and back, particularly the forward portion of that, and apply that in our climbing skill. So if you haven't seen those videos, I recommend you pause and go check those out. And there are actually 3 climbing techniques I'm going to teach you this week. So let's take a look at what each one of those is. I'll describe it and show you at the same time before we get into a moving demonstration. The first climbing technique is the seated climb, and as that name implies, you're remaining in the saddle for this climb. Usually used for moderate slopes, moderate inclines, climbing up where there isn't a lot of challenging or technical terrain to negotiate. Because you're staying seated in the saddle, most of that pedaling power is coming from your lower body. The upper body remains relaxed, very much like a ready position. For this one, you're going to slightly incline your hips and slightly incline your shoulders to come forward as you're climbing up that trail. And a little bit of a technique, I mentioned normally elbows are out. Sometimes you have to pull those elbows in if you're going over a bit of a technical portion of the trail. So again, seated climb, remaining in the saddle, most of the pedaling power coming from the lower body, and used for those moderate, gentle inclines without a lot of challenging terrain. The second climbing technique is the crouched climb. The crouch climb is used for short portions of technical trail when you're climbing. It lets you kind of get up and over those obstacles. You're going to come out of the saddle and move those hips and shoulders forward to really lean into that hill, lean into that incline, and get over that short piece of challenging trail. So again, it's used for just short periods, getting over a technical portion of the trail while you're climbing, and usually you want to go back down to the seated climb or maybe even go to our next technique. The third climbing technique is the standing climb. We use the standing climb for short bursts of power to get up a really steep portion of the incline, or maybe one last push over that technical terrain. We were already in the crouch climb and we just need a bit of power. Also, standing climbs used for those situations. You don't necessarily want to do a gear change. So instead of shifting, just getting up out of the saddle, standing, pushing some more power down to the pedals. Standing climb is also a good way to relax your legs. You've been on a long, slow climb in the seated or maybe even crouched position for a little bit of time. Standing up lets you stretch those legs and give your legs a little bit of a break. So again, the 3 techniques, you've got the seated climb, into the crouch climb, maybe a standing climb. Let's take a look at what all 3 of those look like while we're moving. All right, now that we've talked about climbing and given you a demo, both static and moving, what questions do you have about any three of the climbing techniques?
When climbing, how do I know which gear to shift to?
Thanks for the question, Sofie. Sofie's question was knowing which gear to shift into while climbing, and we covered this during the shifting video, but I want to come back to it now and address it now that we're going to learn these climbing techniques. I always advise people try and shift into the appropriate gear before you start the climb. If you find you have to shift while you're on that climb, remember your technique for shifting. You give a surge to the pedals, you start soft pedaling, and then you shift. It relieves the tension on that chain and just makes a smoother shift. Maybe you don't have to shift for the climb. You're in a seated position during your climb. You think it's getting harder to pedal. Well, just crouch a little bit or maybe stand up, apply some more power to the pedals, maintain that cadence, and when you're through that steep incline or the challenge on the trail, you can get back in the seat, all without having to shift your gear. So, Sofie, that's a great question. Glad we addressed that again. Thanks for asking. All right, now that we've talked about it and we've shown it, asked some questions about it, now everyone's favorite part, the do it portion. You can certainly pause here, go try it out yourself. So when you come back, let's take a look at our athletes doing that, and then I'll join you again for some other parts of the video. Now that you've had a chance to try it yourself and we've watched some of our athletes demonstrate all three climbing techniques, what questions do you still have about climbing?
Coach, is it better to sit or stand when you're climbing?
Anna, thanks for the question. Anna's question was, is it better to sit or stand when climbing? There's three variables to help us answer that question. What is the condition of the trail? What is the condition of your bike? And what is the condition of you? So condition of the trail, depending on how steep that climb is, sometimes you're seated, the trail gets really, really steep, you're gonna have to come out of that saddle, either a crouched or a stand, to get some power down to the pedals. Condition of the bike, I know a lot of times on my rides, my derailleur is acting a little funny, not shifting really well. Maybe I don't want to shift in the middle of a climb, just because I know that's not going to work out well. I'll probably lose some momentum. So again, I'll go to a crouch or I'll go to a stand to get through that section of the climb. And then last, what condition are you in? Are you tired? You're down in the saddle, you just don't feel like you have the power to get through the climb. Crouch, get into a stand, gives you a little more power to get through that portion of the trail. So it's a great question, Anna, whether you should sit or stand. I always think of it in three ways: condition of the trail, condition of the bike, and then condition of you. So thanks for asking that question. So for this week's video, I'm going to introduce a drill and a game that not only is going to work on the climbing skills we've been working on this week, but really incorporates a lot of the other skills we've used throughout the entire series. So set up behind me, I've got two slaloms on the side of a hill, and what we're going to have the athletes do is ride up the hill through the slalom and then come back down the other slalom down the hill. And obviously going up the hill, athletes are going to get a chance to work on their climbing technique, whether they need to crouch or maybe stand to get up that hill. They'll have some bike body separation, even need to execute a shift probably to get up that hill. And then on the way down, guess what? Bike and body separation, a little bit of cornering towards the bottom of the hill, even some braking control as they come down. So you can run this just as a drill with your athletes. You can just have them go through that slalom time and time again, help them out, give them some pointers, or you can set up a couple slaloms, set up some teams with your team and have them race each other through that, and that gets really, really fun. Again, we're gonna take a look here in a minute at Ian going through the course to give you an idea what that looks like, but I found this is a great drill and a great game to work towards the end of a series of foundational skills, because it really works all of them. So let's take a look at what that looks like. right, last section of all our videos, the Improve It section. We're gonna take a look in a minute here at one of our athletes demonstrating climbing, but doing something not quite right. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can catch what the rider is not doing correctly and think about how we give that rider a positive encouragement to get that skill where it needs to be. So let's take a look. Okay, so how did our athlete do with the climbing technique? What did you see that might need to be improved? Really looked like she was almost behind the saddle instead of the front. And so for all of our climbing techniques, doesn't matter even if you're seated, you want your hips moving forward and your shoulders moving forward to lean in to that climb. She did great bike and body separation forward to back, but she looked a little bit back to me. So you really want to bring hips and shoulders forward. So a quick call out like lean in or lean forward might help that athlete remember, oh yeah, I gotta lean into the climb instead of hanging back off the rear of the saddle. And so that brings us to the end of our 8th and final video in our foundational mountain bike skills. Covered climbing this week, but before we close out, I want to give a special thanks to all of our coaches, all of our athletes for helping us throughout this entire series. And I want to give a special shout out to COLIN BURKE. He's the one that's been splicing together and editing all these videos, and that young man can make anyone look good on camera. So thanks so much, COLIN, for helping us out with this series. For everyone else, hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the riding out there, be safe, and hope to see you on the trail someday.